Hello, friends and strangers of the internet. Welcome to Deathstrike Media and the newly rechristened the Austinoid Reviews. Why Austinoid as opposed to Austinite? Well, unlike other residents of Austin, Texas, I was actually raised here, and I'm not a member of the out-of-state horde that is trampling the roads and culture of my hometown. Not that I'm bitter about it. Anyway, I was lucky to attend a screening of Justice League earlier this week, and I wanted to give y'all my thoughts and opinions on the movie after sleeping on it for a day and just collecting my thoughts so I can give y'all the most accurate analysis of the movie that I can. With everything being spoiler-free, I don't want to ruin anything for you, and I'll do my best not to. So, going right into the positive aspects of the film, you know, if there's one thing that DC films I think have had a problem with over the last several years, like even before the Man of Steel continuity, it's been having consistent action in a film. And if you watch a movie like Dark Knight Rises, which I do appreciate as a movie, but it does have a lot of build-up in the beginning, and then the final act is virtually all action. The same goes for Man of Steel, where you get to know the new Superman. I think there's enough character development in Man of Steel. Some people don't agree with me. Don't want to open up that can of worms. Talk about it later. But it is just a slow build of a movie that, again, ends with about a 30 to 40 minute action set piece. And the same goes for Batman v Superman, especially if you watch the Ultimate Edition. There's a lot of build up, and then the final act is just all action. I think that that formula is only one underlying cause of why some DC films get a mixed reception. I do think you have to appease the popcorn movie audience, and Justice League definitely accomplishes that. Every several minutes there's some kind of action beat, and it all builds up to a final act that, again, is a confrontation between the heroes and the villains. But there aren't any dull moments. It is just a constant, just straight up 2-hour movie that knows what it wants to do. It wants to have the audience walk out of the movie thinking that it was a thrilling ride, and I'm glad they did that. Again, I will defend Dark Knight Rises, Man of Steel, and Batman v Superman, but sometimes you do have to just have consistent action to hold the audience. If you watch successful DC films like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, yeah, they had plenty of character development and getting to know the character of Bruce Wayne, but they still knew that at the end of the day, audiences like spectacle and just brawling action, especially if you're a Batman fan, and in Justice League, they got that right. So, kudos to them for that. And I got to join in the consensus of having only good things to say about the cast. I think everyone is great in their roles. I think even critics of Zack Snyder are admitting that, yeah, he did a great job in casting Ben Affleck as Batman, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, Ezra Miller as The Flash, Jason Momoa as Aquaman, and of course Henry Cavill as Superman, who may or may not be in the movie. Just saying. But hard to pick a standout among the cast. Obviously, I'm a Batman fan, so I have a little bit of a bias toward the Caped Crusader. Gal Gadot has had such an amazing year, and this movie, on top of her solo film earlier this year, I think only adds to just the brilliant job that she's done capturing the spirit of Wonder Woman. And probably her fight scene in this movie is, I'll say her 2 fight scenes in this movie are probably the highlights, action-wise, to come out of this film. However, I do want to give a shout-out to Ray Fisher, who I think is the real heart of the team. He's a very reluctant hero, and he's just a regular guy. He's just a kid who was a football player, was in a terrible accident, and to save his life, his father used alien technology, which kind of turned him into this part human, part cyborg, hence the name, where he can interact with any technology on the planet and becomes a very useful member of the team. I liked his, so if I had to pick, I liked his story arc best in Justice League. So there's that. I also want to give a shout out to the villain. I feel like a lot of people have been calling the villain of Steppenwolf, played by Syrian Hines. I hope I'm getting his name right. But they've called him just a walking CGI monster with a very straight up evil plan, and that it wasn't all that interesting. I have to disagree. I feel like that, every once in a while, you need to have a straight up, unredeemable, evil villain. And I think that there are certain moments of the movie where he was baiting members of the Justice League, and the lines that they gave him are just cringe-worthy, in that you want them to just beat up Steppenwolf, just beat him to a pulp. He's like I say, an unredeemable villain, and that's kind of refreshing. I feel like, it's one thing to have a not so black and white vision of heroes and villains, but I feel like sometimes they tried desperately to toss in some sympathy for a villain. Like in BVS, they had Lex Luthor allude to being beaten by his father when he was a kid, but with Steppenwolf, it's just he's straight out evil, and sometimes you just have to have a evil villain who you want the team to beat the crap out of, and I appreciated that they did that with this movie, and it worked for me. And maybe I'm just used to the CGI that you can expect in a Zack Snyder movie. I remember watching Man of Steel and not being bothered that General Zod had an all CGI suit. The first time I saw the movie, I didn't even notice, if I'm being perfectly honest. So I was expecting a CGI villain. It looked good enough to me, so I can't really complain about that. And I am one of those folks who do appreciate practical effects, but, it just wasn't a big issue with me. And I also like that they went with a villain we've never seen before. It would have been easy, I think, to just bring in Darkseid, to have him be the villain that the Justice League fights. But I feel like it would have been seen as kind of a copy of the Marvel formula. Even though Darkseid existed before Thanos, it would have been seen like they were trying to just bring in their Thanos early, and it just wouldn't have had enough weight, and I think that it would have distracted from the team. So I think it was the right call to go with that villain. So I also appreciated the team cohesion. They didn't have any false drama where certain members of the team didn't quite click, or they created the impression that the team was not going to work, but they, do their darn best to rally. They just kind of click almost immediately. There's some tension, but they have a common goal and a common objective, and I like how they just went straight into being a team without the false drama that we've seen in other movies, which I'm not going to name yet, but definitely appreciated that. Now, I also want to say, I don't want to spoil anything, but the post-credits scene in this movie is great. Both of them. There's a mid-credits scene and a post-credits scene. Now, if you watch our videos, you know that I have a negative impression of post-credits scenes. Having been a theater usher, it's annoying to have to clean a theater on a very tight schedule, and having people sit through the credits to watch something that's sometimes very uninspiring. Sometimes the post-credits scenes are fine, but more often than not, I think they're a waste of time. But maybe I'm just, expressing my frustration. But this post-credits scene is probably the best one we've seen since they came into popularity with the Nick Fury post-credits scene in Iron Man. And I can't wait to see what they do with the material that they have just set up. So there's that. Now, moving on to some neutral stuff about the movie, I feel like the score fit for most of the team, but on the whole, I do wish they had kept Tom Holkenborg's Batman theme from Batman v Superman, just for the sake of continuity. I don't think the Danny Elfman theme fits Ben Affleck's Batman. I was hopeful about it, but that was probably the most divisive change that they made to the movie. I was very polarized on the decision earlier this year when Danny Elfman came in to replace Tom Holkenborg, and even though Danny Elfman did some great stuff with The Flash, and did good in his handling of the Wonder Woman theme, where you have echoes of the theme that was established in BVS and her movie, and yes, a hint of the John Williams Superman theme. I think it would have been nice to have a hint of Danny Elfman's theme, and then revert to the Batfleck theme that we got in BVS. So on the whole, I wasn't too keen on the score while I was watching the movie. I've since listened to the score by itself, since the entire soundtrack is on the Water Tower Music YouTube channel, and I would highly recommend you give it a listen just to take it all in. But on the whole, I'm just neutral about it. And even though I have a good impression of this movie, I was trying to think of the right words to describe it, but moving on from the Danny Elfman theme, I would call it a fairly regressive movie. The tone kind of feels like a weird combination of Batman '89 and Batman Forever, in that it's a movie that is meant to be a good popcorn flick and provide a good amount of fan service. Not that those are bad things, but I do like a little bit of ambition in my movies. And again, say what you will about Batman v Superman, it was an ambitious film. It required you to read up on comic book lore, which I did in the wake of the film. I wanted to know what happened in the movie, and I took that information that they gave us in the film, and I picked out comics like Crisis on Infinite Earths and the Injustice comics, and I adapted. But this is a movie that doesn't really require any extensive knowledge about the previous films or the characters. They just kind of lay it all out. And again, it had a very 90s comic book feel. I could easily see this movie fitting in with the films I just named, or even The Shadow with Alec Baldwin. And so, again, those are all movies that I like, but I do always want comic book movies to move forward. And this one, again, was a little regressive in the tone and the feeling that they were going with. Finally, yeah, neutral on the topic of, I guess you would call it character development. There's some great moments between Batman and Flash, and Batman and Wonder Woman, and Cyborg and Flash. But I do wish that, I'm avoiding spoilers, but there are a few characters in particular I wish they'd just given a few lines of dialogue to have them reconnect. And it just didn't happen. I'll talk about that more when I do a spoiler review. Now, moving on to the negatives, this does very much feel like a movie that was kind of hastily cut together with all the reshoots that they had to do. Now, either they did the reshoots to change the tone, or because this was originally going to be a two-part film, or it's a combination of both. I think that they started making this film at a very awkward time. BVS was only a few weeks old when they started filming this movie, and they already wanted to make changes based on that film's reception. I think that we're kind of seeing the end of the era of the two-part films. I think audiences are tired of that formula. Lord knows I am. Where you have part one of a finale and then part two. Just make one solid movie and then wait a few years and then make a sequel to it. It doesn't have to be a very complicated formula. So Justice League felt like a movie that, especially in the second half of it, was reduced, recut, and reshot. And there isn't a lot of breathing room in the movie. I, as I said earlier, appreciate the action that we got out of it, but there are moments where they're making critical decisions, and I wish they had at least one or two good close-ups of the characters as they're making up their minds or trying to reach a final decision on how to fight the villain and the means by which they're going to do that. And so a little bit of breathing room would have made the movie better. And finally, there is the issue of humor. I wanted to end on this topic because, you know, I am one of those folks who like movies to be taken more seriously. I don't mind moments of levity, but with a lot of people, they want these movies to be fun, I think is the word we all go to whenever we just can't think of anything else to say. And yeah, this is a fun movie. And it fits with certain characters. I have no problem with the Flash having an outstanding sense of humor. I like Aquaman being kind of the bro of the team and having his kind of surfer dude sense of humor. And there's a few moments where they give Ben Affleck's Batman a punchline or two. I was okay with most of them. There's maybe one in particular that I wish they had just taken out of the movie because it's just not fitting the character. If the humor fits the character, by all means, go along with it. And I hope that they don't lay on the humor a little too thick in the future. This is why I wanted a few days to think about the movie, because I had to eat my words after watching Wonder Woman, because I said virtually the same thing, that there was maybe a little too much humor. I then went back and rewatched the film, and I thought, no, I was wrong. There's just enough humor to get the job done, to appease that crowd, but enough seriousness so that you can appreciate the film on its merits. With Justice League, I think they maybe overcorrected on the humor a little bit, but it wasn't enough to tick me off. You know, I am one of those folks that liked Batman v Superman, so if they had to overcorrect to appease the people who were somehow put off by that film, I'm all for it. Compromise is not a bad thing. So, this was a little bit of a longer review than I wanted to make, but if it's a DC film, I have strong opinions about it. So, hope you all like it, and I will look forward to talking about the full spoilers of the movie next week, and y'all have a good night, and I will see y'all at the movies.